Not only is Donald Trump having approval ratings problems, he's having trust problems. You probably know about the approval rating stuff. He's been sort of hovering between 33 and 38% approval, depending on the poll, a record low at this point in a presidency since polling began. But on the issue of trust, there's a new SSRS CNN poll, which looked at how trustworthy is Donald Trump in the eyes of Americans. And this is the real internal question from this poll that I'm interested in. Only 24% of Americans say that they trust all or most of what they hear communicated by the Trump White House. The same poll also shows weakening in support from Republicans for Donald Trump. That is a key internal that we've been looking at. In this poll, Trump's approval rating among Republicans is down to 59%. I know it's still, to any clear thinking individual, you say, wait, 59% of any group supports Donald Trump? That's weird. But 59% support for a Republican president from Republicans, that's also problematic, Pat.
Well, I think many of these Trump supporters are finally coming around to the idea that this guy is a con artist, even though it's, 9 months too late since the election.
Yeah.
Because, if you voted for him because you thought he would jail Hillary Clinton, turns out that was just something he just said on the campaign, or that he would drain the swamp. Well, now he has Goldman Sachs officials and financiers in his cabinet, or that he's going to build the wall with Mexico. Then he talks to the Mexican president, so that's not very much of a priority. In the words of George W. Bush, you fool me, you can't get fooled again.
And people are getting fooled again and again. And of course, some people will hear these polling data and say, well, David, this is a fake poll. The poll is wrong, just like election polls were wrong. It's been a couple months since I last debunked that talking point, so I think it's important to do it every once in a while, especially since not everybody might have heard that. There's a lot of new people in our audience. So the talking point is, you can't trust any approval poll today because the election polls in November were so wrong. So two points on this, and this is important stuff for everybody to understand. Number one, election polls are completely different from approval polls, right? Pre-election polls are based on what's called a likely voter model. We have about 50% voter turnout in the United States. So a huge part of predictive election polling is who is actually likely to vote. Because if you're polling people who aren't going to vote, it doesn't really matter who they would vote for because they're not actually going to vote. So if someone says, I'm definitely voting, is that a likely voter? If someone voted in the last 2 elections, does that make them a likely voter? That is a big factor when you look at pre-election polling. That is not a factor in approval polling, okay? So that's number one. Number two, the pre-election polls weren't wrong. Point to a poll that was actually wrong. Most polls that you saw before the election were national popular vote polls, and they were right. They mostly had Hillary Clinton up by about 3 points. Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by about 3 points. So the pre-election polls were not wrong. Now, even at the state level, the polls were within the margin of error. Trump squeaked out a win in states like Wisconsin, but it was within the polling margin of error. There was no huge error by pollsters pre-election. Now, it may have been wrong to think every tight race that Obama won will eventually be won by Hillary. Sure, that was a mistake. But to argue that there was a polling error is wrong. That was an analysis error that many people made, ourselves included. But the talking point that the polls were wrong in 2016, it's just not true.
And you look at Real Clear Politics, they gave Donald Trump a 33% chance of winning, something like that. I mean, just because it's not the majority, that doesn't mean that can't happen.
And back to this particular poll about only 24% of Americans trusting what comes out of the Trump White House. When only a quarter of the people in the country trust you, believe what you say, that is going to cause a cascade of problems. And we're already seeing it, and we will likely continue to see it. You can discuss this with us on our Reddit discussion forum at davidpakman.com/REDDIT. The video you just watched was made possible by support from you. Please go to patreon.com/davidpakmanshow. You can make a pledge of as little as $1 per month. And every dollar helps to support the work that we're doing, particularly in light of the YouTube ad boycott, which has been really bad.